My dear friend in Christ, here's a wonderful saint who said, "It is not sufficient for me to love God if I do not love my neighbor. I belong to God and to the poor." He is Saint Vincent de Paul. It is interesting to know the amazing and even stunning history of this great saint. First of all, let's be reminded that Saint Vincent de Paul did not establish the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul. Frederick Ozanam, who was inspired by the mission, the dedication, and the zeal of Vincent de Paul, founded this society in Paris in 1833. Frederick Ozanam was born in 1813 in Italy and died on 8 September 1853 in France. Ozanam was a French literary scholar, a lawyer, a journalist, and equal rights advocate. He founded with fellow students the Conference of Charity that later became known as the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. In 1997, he was beatified by Pope John Paul II in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. Let's remember that the Society of St. Vincent de Paul was founded almost 150 years after Vincent de Paul's death. St. Vincent de Paul was born on 24th April 1580, and he was born to a peasant family in Pouilly, Gascony, France. Vincent de Paul died in Paris on 27 September 1660 at the age of 79. He was canonized on 16 June 1737, and in 1883, the Church designated him as the special patron of all charitable associations. Now here's something interesting about St. Vincent de Paul. He actually spent the first 20 years of his life chasing only after fame and wealth. And he did become very famous for his dedication to the poor. But he spent his early life trying to escape his humble roots. His family boosted that ambition, hoping that he can make a career in the priesthood and improve the fortunes of the family. And the young Vincent joined the seminary. But one day when his dad came to visit him, he refused to see his dad because he looked very shabby. But by God's providence, Vincent became a priest at a very young age of 19. But in the early years of his priesthood, he spent most of his time with rich and influential people. They too loved him a lot because of his charming disposition, his intelligence, and even his lovely sense of humor. My dear friend in Christ, now see how our good Lord had his own way of winning this young priest to his heart. In 1605, Father Vincent was returning home by boat after selling some property he had received as an inheritance from a very wealthy patron. While sailing, suddenly Turkish pirates invaded that boat and he was captured. You can imagine what a terrifying experience it was for Father Vincent. Those pirates took him to Tunis in North Africa, and there they sold him into slavery. Father Vincent remained a slave for 2 long years. This was a turning point in his life. He fell on his knees repeatedly before God, pleading for mercy. He promised the Lord that if his life would be spared and if he was freed, he would devote the rest of his life to the service of the poor. And the Lord answered his prayer and made a way. He escaped with his master, a renegade, a deserter, whom he had converted. Vincent realized that the mistakes of his young life, especially his focus on wealth and fame, had been caused by a very poor faith foundation. In his new life of freedom from slavery, Father Vincent served in a church in rural France. Here was another turning point in his life. He was shaken and shocked. He saw how people were unable to find work in his poor community, died from starvation. Stirred with compassion, Father Vincent started taking stock of his resources and started reconnecting with all his former wealthy and influential friends and began seeking their financial assistance. He personally met and inspired them to form groups and go house to house, requesting food, clothing, and even furniture. A wonderful organizer that he was, Father Vincent became tremendously successful in this noble venture. Other parishes began contacting him to learn how they too could organize such a charity drive. Very soon, churches all over France began using the same techniques that Father Vincent initiated to help the poor, the needy. He soon founded an order of priests, the Vincentians, who received through training and who pledged to devote their lives to the spiritual and material needs of the poor. Later, he, along with Louise de Marillac, founded the Sisters of Charity. Filled with a burning love for Christ and the poor, he began founding hospitals, orphanages, and homes for people who were mentally ill. He also devoted the last years of his life serving prisoners and slaves, sharing with them his own story of hope as a former slave himself. He became well known throughout Europe in his own time. This man of God was called for his eternal reward. Saint Vincent de Paul died on September 27, 1660. Saint Vincent de Paul's motto, to see Christ in the poor and to be Christ to the poor, is still followed by millions across the world. In the light of Saint Vincent de Paul's motto and mission, the very baseline, the central focus, and the two people for the functioning of the society of Saint Vincent de Paul is Christ and the poor. So great was the impact of his life that even the Anglican Communion honor this great saint to this day. May Saint Vincent de Paul's burning love for Christ and love for the poor be an inspiration for each of us. May you have a good and godly day.